All right. How you guys doing? Good to see you. Got kind of this last minute, almost like almost like I'm a true YouTuber now, just kind of like randomly going live at some point in the day, and figured I'd start us off with a win by Grape Nuts. They exist. They're still out there. I just don't want to. I don't want us to get complacent and think he's going to win every race. But yeah, so I kind of am thinking of this as just a pretty casual meeting, but it's being streamed on YouTube, and I'll post this. And what I wanted to do is there's a set of questions that I'd hoped to go over yesterday, and I didn't anticipate getting through all of them, but I really didn't get through any of them. So I figured it made more sense to do this right now in kind of a nice normal pace, and you guys can ask questions throughout these different questions, and I'll give us more than enough time to answer every question. And my hope is that just by plugging through these, in the next 30-40 minutes, everyone will really be making up their own questions for the midterm tomorrow. Because again, I think that what we're doing is relevant and important to what's going on in the world, but ultimately when it comes to the questions that you're being asked about, like, I'm not changing the goods to make them super unique. Really, I want you to take those concepts of, you can see already, like an iPhone, and just apply it to what we know and what we've learned in the class. So no curveballs on that front or anything like that. So yeah. So if you guys don't have any questions, let's just get started with this, and you can play along on Top Hat or not. I'll just kind of just put some calming music on while we're going through these questions and explain each one along the way. So, but if you got questions before I get into that, just shoot them my way. Whether you want to talk out loud or type them out, either way works for me. So, yeah, I'll give you guys a second to do that. Take a drink of water, and then start this presentation here. Right, just start this presentation And we saw yesterday, and this is a good segue, we did this yesterday where we moved those supply and demand curves. I've got a couple more reviews down here, or review questions that are more straightforward, but I think these 10 or 12 are what I really want to focus on today. So, okay, so let's get this started. Let's get the day started, and you might have read that question already, but in 2018, your friend gives you an old iPhone 5 produced in 2010. Which of the following would be included in the GDP for 2018 as a result of this donation? And just to give you a little background on where questions come from, where did this question come from? In 2018, the friend is actually my sister giving an old iPhone 5 to Bree. So that's, and I thought, okay, well, that's actually a question that I could use for class. So here we go. Give this a try, and tell me where this is. Where do we add this to GDP? And I'm going to start writing out some things along the way about what I want you to know on this topic. So give it a go, and we'll come back in about a minute or so. All right, last 10 seconds. Obviously, no pressure on any of this. All right. So, actually, you know what? I'm just going to keep this open while I'm talking about this. I think that's probably a good thing to do, just as folks are coming in just throughout the session here. So first, all right, let's address this question in particular. So if we think about this old iPhone that was produced in 2010, when it was produced in 2010, that's the GDP it counted for, 2010 GDP. So when your friend gives you that old iPhone that was produced in 2010, 8 years later, well, that there was no new production, nothing changed, right? So when that occurs, when that donation occurs, we would expect there to be no change in the GDP today. And so what do we get? And that's where the majority of you guys are headed, and that's exactly right. So the correct answer is that there's no change in GDP. Now, as we go through these questions, what I want you guys to note is that you are not going to see this exact question on the midterm. Like, this is the topic that we're talking about, like the used goods or old products in GDP. But I'm not going to ask you this question about the iPhone and a donation. What I want you to take from this question is I want you to start thinking about the double counting idea. So if we've got old used products in our discussion here, old used products do not count towards GDP today, right? So today's GDP, right, doesn't include those older used products. And so you could say, all right, well, he could ask me a bunch of questions about used products, and I know that the value of those used products today don't count towards GDP today because they were counted already. There are some caveats though, right? We talked about this, and I asked actually a question about this, and so this is where I want you guys to extend that and say, okay, well, what else could he ask about? Don't just stop here and say, okay, I got this question, I can move on, right? Think about the things, the parts of old or used products being bought or sold that would count towards GDP. And in particular, right, services that involve some sort of agent in the sale of the goods, some service that is involved when the good is actually being sold is going to count for GDP today. So I'll write this out. So services involved in the sale of used goods count. Okay, so what do I mean by that? If there is somebody that's part of this transaction here with this iPhone, like let's say that you sell your iPhone to a secondhand store for $100, just work with me on that, and then that secondhand store sells it to somebody else for $125. There's essentially like $25 in services that are essentially transacted there. So anytime there's some sort of service involved that is created today, that's going to count towards the GDP today. So that's for the iPhone, but I think I'm not going to ask you about like an iPhone off kind of like, you know, secondhand store transaction. I'm thinking more like real estate agent, right? A real estate agent or a used car salesperson. Right, so the emphasis here is really understanding not what the answer to this question is, but rather what the concepts behind it are. Okay, so that's the first question. Everybody feel good? You got questions? Just throw them out here, whether it's in chat or whether it's just verbally. I've got the Discord up, so I could answer it on there, but that's a lot of multitasking for an older guy like me. So don't count on anything. So, all right. So if everybody's feeling good about that, right, let's move on to the next question then. Okay. This one's a little bit more difficult. All right. But what we see here is that we have iPhones again, another situation with iPhones, just because again, it's a good that I think we can all at least that we're comfortable with or are familiar with at the very least. All right, so in 2017, we've got $500 of iPhones being produced, okay? All right, $500 in iPhone production, okay, in 2017, all right? And then that same year, right, $600 worth of iPhones are sold. $600 in iPhones are sold in 2017. So here's kind of a fill in the blank question, right? So we've got consumption spending in 2017 changing by some amount, something about private inventories changing by some amount, and then overall GDP in 2017, changing by some amount. So what are the fill in the blanks there, right? And what you'll see here is a increase or decrease by some number, okay? So increase or decrease by some number. So give this a try here. Work through this. This is the tougher question, right? This is a tougher question, but it's getting at that idea of what it means to have a change in inventories, okay? So give it a go. You can try to guess the songs along the way. They're all. All right. So let me come back and I'll open this back up and talk about this while people have more time to answer. So no rush on there. All right. So when we're looking at this question, all right, we got $500 in iPhone production in 2017, but $600 in iPhones sold. So there's a discrepancy there. But what we can do is go back to what the meaning of GDP is, and then also what the components of GDP are. So when we look at this $500 in iPhone production, funny the top hat's acting a little squirrely today. It works out fine because it's not the middle of class, we're not time constrained. But when we look at $500 in iPhone production in 2017, this means that our GDP increased by $500, right? So that can ground you, right? So if $500 in iPhones were produced in 2017, that should tell you that we're increasing GDP by $500 in 2017. The thing that gets unique or kind of odd about this is that when we have $600 in iPhones sold in 2017, we have consumption increasing by more than the production, by $600. Okay, so then the question becomes, where did the extra $100 in iPhones come from? And this is where I encourage you guys to have a story. And again, whether it's coffee or clothing or iPhones or whatever it happens to be, right? Have a story in your mind that says, okay, so we're at the store, there's $500 in iPhones that were produced, but then 600 were sold. Where did that extra 100 come from? Somebody went in the back room and said, oh, let me see if there's some extra back there, right? You can almost envision that happening, right? And then we just need to translate that into what we know or the vocabulary that we're using here. So we would say this comes from the stock room, like literally the stock room, but this is actually just inventory. Okay, so it's easy to get backwards and say, oh, well, which way does inventory go? Does it go up or down? Again, just have that story in your mind saying, like, they went into the stock room, they went to their inventory, and they took something out. Now there is less inventory than there was before, that literal taking out of the inventory, right? This is a decrease in our inventory of $100. Okay, and I encourage you guys to come up with some example that you can just hang on to that isn't, again, just nothing too outrageous, but that you can just say, okay, this is me going into the stockroom, decreasing that inventory. So when we put this all together, right, we should see, well, okay, well, consumption spending, okay, so great, have these questions come up. So why did our inventory decrease and not increase? So you can literally imagine, right, that we have $500 in iPhones out on the floor, right, to be sold, right? But then $600 are essentially are eventually sold. So how would that actually take place? So you got $500 in iPhones sold. Now there's nothing on the shelves. How do we get extra iPhones if they're not being produced? We've got to go to that stock room and go to that back room where there's inventory and take out the inventory, right? Take out $100 worth of iPhones and put it on the shelves and have those bought as well. So now when we look at the stock room, it originally had a certain amount of iPhones in it. Now there's $100 less, right? We've actually taken it out. So we've decreased the value of that inventory by $100, right? So you can think of it as the value of what's in that inventory. Okay. If you got push me on those questions. If that's not making sense. Okay. So again, yes. So is that $100 in iPhone not produced in 2017? That's exactly the point. That's the question that just came up. That is exactly right. So all that stuff in the stock room, that was produced in 2016, right? And it was left over from the previous year. Now we've got some extras from the previous year. Let's pull those out and let's sell those. Another good to look at or to kind of think about that maybe is more, you could see this playing out maybe even more so because it's not technological, is clothing, right? So you have like a stock of clothing one year, not all of it gets sold, some of it goes into inventory. The next year, a bunch of people buy a t-shirt, right? There's not enough t-shirts to match all the demand or all the production this year, so more is coming out of the stock room. That's decreasing that inventory, okay? So the takeaway here, right, and let's write this out. When our consumption is greater than production, right? When our consumption is greater than production. So don't just write it out, like literally think about this. Like we are buying more than is being produced. In order for that to actually happen, we must have a decrease in inventory, right? To match that additional consumption that's beyond production. Okay. So keep asking questions on that, right? This is an important point to get. The thing that I can assure you is that I kind of gave myself a hard time about saying like, gosh, you guys are going to think that this guy really likes changes in inventory. And I guess I do. I suppose I'm pretty agnostic about it. But it is something that we're going to talk about after the midterm too. This is not one of those things that is just going away. This is actually going to be at the heart of GDP and macroeconomic equilibrium. And you can kind of start to think like, wouldn't it be ideal if they just produced as much as that is consumed? That's actually true. Like, and that's kind of leading us to this larger equilibrium that we'll get to after the midterm. So this principle is something that we're going to definitely hang on to. Okay. Okay. So let's just put the numbers on here, right, and say, okay. So we saw that consumption, right? We had consumption of $600 in iPhones, right? So that's how many were sold in 2017. So consumption's got to go up by 600. That means we've got increased by 600, $500 in iPhone production in 2017. GDP has got to go up by 100. That gap, that difference is going to be adjusted by the inventory. And because we're pulling things out of the stock room, it's going to be a decrease in inventory of $100. Another way to say this is that we would say we have a total increase, right? A total GDP increase of $500, which comes from an increase in consumption of $600 and a decrease in our, we'll say, inventories, which are captured by investment. Right, that was one of the characteristics of investment, of $100. Right, and so consumption, right, so can you define consumption again? Consumption is just simply going to be the amount of what is bought by households. Okay, so this is going to be folks like you and me buying goods and services. It's not firms or the government. Okay, so you can think of all purchases by not the government, not firms, but you as a household. Okay, isn't consumption part of total GDP? Absolutely, absolutely. However, right, in this case, we're thinking about like the amount this production, right, this production of iPhones, right, can't match all the consumption, right? So we have more consumption than actual production, so we have to adjust for that, right, by decreasing the inventories. That's a good. That's like that. That question, Carlos, is actually like everything kind of coming together. Like keep pushing on this, right? Because we're just saying, look, the change in total GDP that comes. Consumption is part of that, right? But because consumption is above that, in this case, we have to adjust for it with a decrease in investment or decrease in inventories, which is a decrease in investment. Does it matter which order they are in because B and C look similar? Absolutely, right? So what we'd want to do is we'd want to say this means that consumption spending in 2017, what by what? Private inventories, what by what? Overall GDP, what by what? So the way I'd approach questions like these is I'd say, well, you know, the most straightforward thing is that the GDP has got to go by 500. So I know it's got to be one of these two, right? And then it's just a matter of saying what happened to consumption. Well, in both cases, consumption increased by 600. So those are both right. So it's really about whether we increased or decreased our private inventory. And we kind of were split on that. But when it comes to what it is, we have this decrease in our inventory, again, because we have to match that. We have to match that consumption. We didn't produce enough. Okay. This is great. I actually like. It's funny. If I'm talking too much, just tell me to move on. Are you allowed? Oh, question came in on chat. Are we allowed to use a calculator for the midterm? You are allowed. I mean, I that would be a hard thing for me to monitor that, and it'd be a hard ask, right? It'd be like if I was like open book, open note. You know, don't talk with friends, but if you use your calculator, I don't know. So no, you're good. You're good on the calculator. You're good on the calculator for sure. Okay. So yeah, no, this is good stuff. I like talking about this just to make sure everybody's on the same page and we can clear up any particular issues there are. Okay. All right. So you can kind of see that, and you know, I've skipped a couple definitional questions that I've left them out, and you can look through those. You know, understanding the definitions and nuances and things like that. We touched on it with used goods, but there's other nuances as well. In terms of like land doesn't count, stocks, things like that. There's got to be actual production. Underground economy, that doesn't count as well. So in terms of GDP, but these kind of numerical questions I think are important to get a real good grasp of. Okay, so what would be another type of question I could ask you regarding this? And you guys can start to guess what's coming. All right, but if we're looking at an economy, you could imagine a scenario where I give you a couple years of information, and notice I'm going to write this in a different way, just because I want you guys to not memorize what it looks like, but rather understand what the process is to figuring out something like GDP. So imagine that we have two goods. We've got beer that has a quantity and a price in 2 years. Oh, I should put beer price, and we have clothing. Okay, so as you guys hopefully know by now, I'm not going to be giving you 20 goods, right? It's going to be 2 or 3 or 4 goods or something like that, right? I'm not going to have you do a ton of calculations, but I do need to give you some information, okay? And so the information I'm going to give you is that the beer quantity in this particular economy in 2007 is 100. The beer price is 6. The clothing quantity is 50. The clothing price is 4. Then in 2016, we have a change. We actually have less beer purchased, but for a higher price. And then we've got more clothing for a higher price as well. Okay. So what my question here to start us off with is, what is the nominal GDP in 2007? Okay. What is the nominal GDP in 2007? So let's give this a go, right? And I'll work through it with you, but we can get us rolling on this set of questions. And if you have a guess of what the next question might be, go for it. Okay. So, all right. So I'm going to keep this open. Question came up, and above these Qs, how am I writing this out? What is this? This is Q07. That was clear, P07. But I've got beer and I've got clothing. So I've got a B and a C. So I'm mapping out, right, just exactly what I need, right, in each step, each parts of these this equation here. So when I do this here, right, so when I'm trying to get the nominal GDP, what we have to remember is that this is just all the expenditures in a particular year, right, that are counting towards GDP at the given prices, right, the current year prices, the price of the year that we're concerned with. So we have no adjustment on the prices or anything like that. We're just saying, look, we've had 100 units of beer times $6 per beer, right? So that's going to be the amount of sales, right? The expenditures on beer, right? Quantity times price there. And then we also have 50 units of clothing times 4. And you know, a relevant question came up by Zam, said, why is beer more expensive than clothing? You know, that's my clothing. You know, if my clothing was a beer, it'd be like Keystone Light, right? So when we do this, when we add all this up here, right? And again, I'll just keep this open here, right? When we add all this up, we've got $600 in beer purchases, and then we've got $200 in clothing purchases. This is going to give us $800, right? So again, the numbers themselves shouldn't be that strenuous or taxing, right? But we should be able to get that right answer every time. We should come up with some system, and you guys clearly did. Okay, so all right, so you can kind of, again, I can go a couple different directions with this type of question, right? Where are we going to go next, right? Well, we're going to make this, let's see, let's get going. Let's go next, right? All right, so here's a little bit of a curveball, right? Here's a little bit of a curveball. I want to know, what is the real GDP in 2007? Notice what I did here is that I just arbitrarily chose a base year as 2016. We don't always need the base year to be the first year that we're working with. It can be any year we want, right? We just kind of had it as year 1, and we'll see that moving forward that might be the case, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any year we want. So what I can do is I can identify 2016 as this base year, okay? So what is the real GDP in 2007 using 2016 as the base year? Okay, so give this a go, and we'll come back in a couple minutes, right? A minute or two, right? So I have some time here. All right, here we go. Just waiting for people to guess these songs. All right. So I've got this thing color coded for us. All right, can you take it the next steps? Okay, so notice what I've done here. All right, when we have a real GDP calculation we want, what we have to do again is identify that base year, and in this case it's 2016. So what we're going to do is take the quantity in 2007 and multiply it by the prices in our base year, which is equal to 2016, which is what I've done with those colors, highlighted with those colors. Okay, then we're just going to multiply and add, right? So when we do this, right, notice that those quantities don't change, right? So we've got a beer quantity of 100, but what would happen if the beer quantity was priced in 2016 dollars instead of 2007? We would multiply this by 10, not by 6. Okay. Same thing with clothing, right? We'd have 50 units of clothing, but instead of selling them for $4 a piece, now it's going to be $8. Okay. So again, the math isn't hopefully not too taxing, right? That's not the point of it. We're going to get 1,000 plus 400. We're going to get $1,400. Okay. So what are the responses here? Yeah. So we're starting to see, right? Again, like a high fraction of folks getting this right. If you didn't, right, what you want to make sure of is you want to make sure that that base year, don't let that base year fool you or get you confused, right? That base year is whatever we want it to be, and then the prices stay at those base year prices no matter what. Okay. All right. Everybody feeling okay? Okay. Ask questions if you got them, right? Ask questions if you got them. But again, we found a nominal GDP. We found a real GDP. Can you guess what I'm going to ask next? I bet you guys can, right? And this is what I want you to do. I want you to come up with your own goods. I want you to come up with your own quantities and prices. Your base year, figure out nominal GDP, real GDP. What about the GDP deflator? So now I've told you the numbers, right? You're told nominal GDP in a year is 800, real GDP is 1400. What is the GDP deflator? Okay, give this a try here. All right. So this one is hopefully one of the easiest ones you've had, just because if you have that GDP deflator ready to go, right, you're going to be all squared away when it comes to just calculating this GDP deflator on this next step. So the thing to remember about this GDP deflator is that this is helping us capture how prices have changed in a relative sense from one year to the next. The reason that we can say that is that we're getting nominal GDP over real GDP. So we're getting the quantity in 07 times the price in 07, right? That's going to be our nominal GDP. And we're dividing this by the quantity in 07 times the price in our base year. So it's telling us essentially, you know, it's not quite the ratio. It's not quite the strict ratio of prices in 07 over prices in the base year, but it has this feel to that, and it's because it's weighted by that quantity in 07. So when we do this, hopefully I'm just going to go straight to the responses. Yeah, and so this is just taking 800 over 1400 and multiplying it by 100, and we're going to get 57.1 as our GDP deflator. So the way to think about this, and the thing to keep in mind, is that our base year GDP deflator is always going to equal 100. The reason it's always going to equal 100 is because the nominal GDP and the real GDP in the base year will be the same, right? So base year, and I'll write this out, base year nominal GDP equals base year real GDP. Okay, so because of that, take the nominal divided by the real, they're the same thing. That's just 1, multiply it by 100, you got 100. So the way that we can think about this base year versus base year GDP deflator versus this 57.1 is that the average good, and again, you don't want to be too strict with this, but if we said, hey, the average good in the base year is priced around $100, priced at $100, well, the average good in 2007 was priced at 57.1. Okay. All right. So good to see that, right? Good to see that. Now you guys can guess the next question, right? So, oh yeah, if you got a question, fire away, right? I saw a hand up. I don't know if that was on purpose or.
Yeah. So for I'm trying to see for like Q for 2007, is it times P is BY by year?
Base year.
Base year. Okay. Thank you.
Base year. Yeah. No, it's good to clear that up, right? That's an important year. That's an important year. So good question. Any other questions? All right. I should actually have you guys guess what the next question is, but I can go ahead and throw it out there. All right. So we've got the GDP deflator in 1 year. In the next year, all right, and we'll call it 2008. We'll say that the GDP deflator in 08 is equal to 60. Okay, so the numbers just happen to be it turns out that it's 60 for that GDP deflator. Okay, so then the question becomes, what is the inflation rate between year 1, year 2, or 2007, 2008 in this case? Okay, so give this a try, and I'll kind of work through it with you. All right. All right. So hopefully everybody's feeling comfortable with this. What we're doing here with this inflation rate is we're just getting, and I'm going to write this out, this is going to be the percentage change, in this case, in our GDP deflator, right? It's going to be the percentage change in the CPI in the next set of questions, which again, you guys should start to say, oh, I could probably write the next set of questions because you probably can, right? But in this case, we're working with the GDP deflator. That means that when we look at this GDP deflator between 07 and 08, we've got the deflator going from 57.1 to 60. So it's increased by 2.9 points on this index. So again, if you want to think of it as the average good went from $57.1 to 60, went up by $2.9. But what's the base, right? How much did this go up in percentage terms? We've got to divide it by 57.1, and we end up with 5.1%. What our response is, all right, you guys are just kind of rolling along with these types of questions. So my advice to you at this point is to just come up with new numbers, come up with new goods. I'll do one more question on this towards the end that's got a little bit of a nuance to it, but ultimately you guys are ready to go with those types of questions. Okay, all right. Any questions? Any thoughts? So you kind of see the GDP world there. Okay, all right. So now the next set of questions, starting with question 8. Okay, has to do with the CPI. Now, what's going to tip you off about the CPI? Well, one of the things that'll tip you off is I'll just ask you, right? That'll be one way to tip you off that you should get the CPI. The other one is that I'll be asking about a basket of goods, and there's only going to be one quantity. Okay, now you can think of these quantities as weights. It's a little, I've kind of been a little loose on that when you look at the textbook and whatnot, but the process is going to be the same regardless. And so when you see this table that I'm about to write, you're not going to see a quantity for any particular year. It's just going to essentially be the base year quantity or the quantity that we care about, and that is not going to change over time. We're going to allow the prices to change. Okay, so the goods that I'm going to focus on here, this is me getting really, I don't know if it's boring or lazy or just my world of iPhones and water. So that's what I have here. I got an iPad and a water. And so I'll just tell you, notice I'm just going to give you one year of quantity, or just any year of quantity. And I'm going to say in any year of quantity, or any year, the quantity of iPhones is 25 and water is 1,000. And then I've got to tell you the base year, and I'll put BY, right? Base year price. And let's say that 2011 is our base year. Our base year price is going to be $500 and $1. So again, you hopefully will see that I'm going to do everything I can to not make the math be cumbersome. Sometimes, like a percentage change, there's just not much I can do. But at least on the base year prices, and then when we think of current year 2016 prices, this is also going to be $600 and $1.25. Okay. All right. So the first thing I'm asking you about, what is the basket cost in 2011, or again, our base year is equal to 2011. Okay, so let's give this a go. It should feel a little bit like GDP. Let's come back in like a minute or so. All right. All right. I'll open this back up and then kind of go through it from my end here. All right. So when we're looking at the basket cost, right, all we've got to remember is that quantity stays the same. So hopefully this is getting a little more routine now. All right. And you can say, oh, so I just need to get the iPhone quantity right there. And then I've got the iPhone price right here. And then I've got to go ahead and get the water quantity and then get the water price right here. That's all we've got to do, right? We don't need to overcomplicate this. All we're saying is that we've got 25 iPhones times 500 plus 1,000 units of water times $1. This ends up being 25 times 5,000. That's going to be 12,500 plus 1,000. This is equal to 13,500. Okay. So it's all right. And if you, so let's see what those responses are. Yeah. So we're, so it's okay. So, make sure, it's not 100. And those will be easier when you're looking at the table here too. So I just wrote it down on the screen here, didn't make it bigger. So that basket that we're concerned with, all right, that's going to cost us $13,500 in our base year. You guys know what the next question is, right? What's that basket going to cost in 2016? Okay, what's that basket going to cost in 2016? All right. So, good question came up in chat. Why are we using the term basket all of a sudden? Where did this come from? And this ultimately comes from the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. When we calculated the Consumer Price Index, remember back in class we talked about what goods the typical consumer buys, and essentially I asked you guys, what do you want to put in the basket? And that didn't include a lot of things that go into the GDP deflator. So that GDP deflator includes all goods that are part of the GDP. All right, so that's going to be, you know, all exports, all imports, stop signs, playgrounds, all that stuff that is part of the GDP, but isn't necessarily, it's not bought by the consumers. So what we would like to get is we'd like to get a nice, accurate depiction of how prices have increased for consumers. Oh yeah, sorry about that. Let me just go ahead and open that up, of course. Okay, so here we've got a basket cost of with iPhones and water. Okay, and so in 2011, that basket cost $13,500. In 2016, we still have the same amount of iPhones and we still have the same amount of water. What's changed though is that we've got a price of $600 for iPhones and $1.25 for our water. Okay, so that means that if we take 25 multiplied by 600, 1,000 multiplied by 125, what do we end up with? We end up with 16,250. Okay, so that same basket from 2011 that cost $13,500 now costs $16,250. Okay, so let's see what everybody put. Yep, so we've got a lot of right answers there. It was still open when I said the right answer. Nonetheless, I'm sure you guys were on. Clearly, a lot of you guys were on that track. Okay, all right. Got basket cost in 2011. Got a basket cost in 2016. And guess what's coming next, right? What is that CPI now in 2016? Okay, what is that CPI in 2016? All right. So now that we've got our basket costs, we can go ahead and calculate the CPI, which is just going to be the ratio of those baskets. All right. So I can go ahead and open this back up for anybody who wants to still answer. All right. But I've got this thing color coded. Right. So that basket cost in 2016, all right, we did all that work, 16,250. All right. That's going to be our basket cost in 2016. Let's divide that by the basket cost in the base year. That same basket was 13,500. Essentially what we're saying is how much did that basket go up in relative terms compared to 2000 and the base year 2011. All right, and what we're going to end up with is about 120.3. Okay, so what do we get on our responses here? Yeah, we're getting a lot of right answers there. So some folks might have went the other direction, so be careful, right? Be careful. That base year will always be in the denominator. Right, base year will always be in the denominator, because what we're doing here is we're taking the quantity in a particular year times the price in 2016 divided by the quantity times the price in the base year. So again, getting kind of a ratio of prices between 2016 and the base year, just like we did with the GDP deflator, but we're doing it, you know, we're kind of going from moving the other direction and not letting quantity change right over these years, whereas in the GDP deflator, we said here's nominal over real for the same quantity, different prices. Okay? So different kind of motivation but the process absolutely should feel the same, okay? Now, what I want to point out to you guys too, the reason I have this written as 120 and then I've written down 120.3 is that rounding shouldn't affect anyone at any point. If there's something like, there's no question that the answer here is supposed to be 120. This says 120.3 just because it's not on there. It's not like there's 120.2 and then 120.4. There's never going to be an answer like that. Okay, so there's rounding will never affect you in that way. Okay, just to keep that in mind. Okay, all right. So we've got the CPI, right? We got basket cost, CPI. What do you think the next question is? Yeah, you can all guess the next question, right? You can all guess the next question. So now what I'm telling you is essentially to start over and say, look, CPI in 2016, we're going to round to 120. And then we're going to say CPI in 2017 is 130. Okay. I want to know what is that inflation rate using this CPI between 2016 and 2017. Okay. So let's give this a try, all right, and come back in a minute or so. All right. All right, so how do we get this inflation rate using the CPI? No different than we did before with the GDP deflator in the sense that we're using the percentage growth in our CPI as the inflation rate. So we can think of this average good in 2016 costing $120. In 2017, it goes up to $130. What's the percentage growth in that? So it's went up $10, right? $10 on that. That's the average good, or again, a way we can think about that. But the base is 120. So we've got 130 minus 120 divided by 120 times 100. So this is going to be equal to 10 over 120 times 100. Okay, so really just 1/12, right? Just 1/12. So when we, okay, so, and I'll get to that question, just came up on chat in just a second. We'll actually go off script a little bit here. So what does this turn out to be? This turns out to be 8.3%. Okay, and so what do we got on the responses? Right, you guys are seeing how to do this. Okay, all right. So the question that came up, a great question that came up, is when getting an inflation rate, is there a reason we subtract from the CPI of the later year? The inflation rate can be negative, right? And yeah, so the way that we would think about this is we would never want to say, okay, well, what happened to prices between 2017 working backwards, right? We don't ever think about moving backwards. We want to say, okay, well, the next year prices change by this much and change by this much. But to Xavier's point here, right, the question about a negative inflation rate is completely valid. So let's work through this, right? Let's take this one step further and say that the CPI in 2019 was equal to 125. Okay, equal to 125. So, and actually, hold on, I'm gonna make these numbers work out because the way I want them to. I'm gonna say 117. Okay, I'm gonna say prices. So the CPI went down a lot, right? Went from 130 to 117. All right. So then the question is, what is the inflation rate between 2017 and I'll say 2019? All right. So I went 2 years, and that's fine. That's actually we can do that just as well. So the way we would get this is we would take the CPI in 2019, subtract the CPI in 2017, and divide by the CPI in 2017 times 100, okay? So notice that I'm doing the same process as I did before. I think the point that, and I'll go ahead and move this as well, just so we have it. I think I have the space for this. Oh, almost, not quite. So I'll do the inflation rate between 2017, 2019, right? All we have to remember is that we're going to take that later year, right? 2019, or the most recent year rather, put that first, have that later year in the denominator and second, okay? So now when we run these numbers, what happens? Well, we've got 117 minus 130 divided by 130 times 100. So can this be negative? Yeah, it can be negative, and we knew that it would be negative because in this case, we said the CPI went from 130 to 117. It's went down, right? The average prices went down, so we should get a negative number. We should get negative 13 divided by 130 times 100. So what did we end up with? We end up with negative 10%. That's why I said I was going to make my numbers easy. All right, make my numbers easy. So this is a great thing that I encourage you guys to do is just expand on these topics. Don't just say, okay, I can do this question, I'm moving on. I want you to say, oh, I can do this question. Let me take it a step further. Let me make up another inflation rate that's, or another CPI that's negative and find the inflation rate, or CPI that's lower, right? And find the inflation rate and find that to be negative. So what does this mean? This means between 2017 and 2019, prices have decreased by 10%, okay? All right, so we've got CPI really taken care of here, and I'm really happy to see that. So I have just one more question that I want to cover, and so what I want to do is I'm not going to touch on employment as much or unemployment because that was what we actually did cover that yesterday, and I can just encourage you guys to write your own questions on that, right? Kind of just change numbers from what we did yesterday. So I had like simple numbers like 50 and 40 and 10. Right, those are the types of numbers you're going to see tomorrow on the midterm. I mean, it'll be closer to like 1,500, something like that. But it's not going to. It's you guys can put down numbers that are comfortable for you. It's the concepts that I really want you guys to feel good about. Okay, all right. So the last question is actually just another GDP question. It's a little bit of a nuance. Okay, and so this question, all right, is going to be. It's going to look a lot like. You've seen these actually in your practice problems and whatnot, but I'm just giving you 1 year of information, and I want you to find the nominal GDP, okay? So the products in this economy are computers, cheeseburgers, and cars, okay? And there's also tires. And the quantities here are 100, 500, 20, 20 and 80, okay? 20 and 80. And the prices are 10, 5, 50, and 7, okay? So what I want you to figure out here is the nominal GDP, just for this economy. Now, I want you to also note that there is some other information in here. Assume that all of the tires are used in the production of cars. Okay, all of the tires, right? There's 20 cars. There's 80 tires. Each car has 4 tires, right? Those tires are used in the production of cars. All right, all of them. So I want you to tell me what the nominal GDP is of this particular economy. Okay, so give this a go, and we'll come back in a minute or so. All right. So with this particular setup, there's just one nuance that really stands out, and that has to be those tires, right? I wouldn't say anything about them otherwise, right? But what I'm really trying to signal here is that because these tires are used in the production of the cars, these tires are considered intermediate goods. Okay, so these are intermediate goods, and they're counted when we add in the cars, right? They're counted in the final good, which are cars. Okay, they're counted in the final good, which are cars. So when we're calculating the nominal GDP, it wouldn't make sense to include the tires, right? Because those tires are on the cars. Part of the reason that the cars have a price of 50 is because tires have a price of 7. I've said that before, but a way to really highlight this is that, and don't write this out, but what if the price was $70 for tires? There's no way the cars would be $50 because tires would be $70, right? So because the tires are $7, that's part of the reason that cars are $50. Okay, so now, all right, we can say when we calculate this GDP, we do not want to include the tires in our calculation. So we're going to take the quantity of computers times the price of computers plus the quantity of cheeseburgers times the price of cheeseburgers. And then we're going to add the quantity of cars times the price of cars. Okay, and so we're going to end up with 100 times 10 plus 500 times 5 plus 20 times 50. So this is $1,000 in computers, $2,500 in cars, $1,000 in our cheeseburger, $2,500 in cheeseburgers. Wow, I made that a lot of cheeseburgers. And what do we end up with? We end up with $4,500. So that answer should be C, right? Not D. Don't include those intermediate goods. Okay, don't include those intermediate goods. So I don't have any more questions on this particular economy, but you'll see in your practice problems that there is an economy that's like this. I think I use avocados on tacos or something like that. I'm not going to have some sort of like ambiguity, like some tires are used on cars and others aren't. They're going to all just not be used, or they're all going to be used. So in this case, all the tires are used in the production of cars. Don't ever count them. So question came up on chat. So back to the CPI, you just find the CPI, you multiply the quantity and price for each product for the given year to get the basket cost, and then you get the ratio of that basket cost right here. Okay, so yeah, so beyond that, right, we can think about what we need to know for this midterm here. So I can go ahead and end this right here, and you guys can see that if you look through this last lecture, and I can go ahead and make these all review now so everybody has access to them again. All right, so what's on here, it's reviewing, right? Let's see here, so let me deselect those. Right, so if we think about what's actually going to be on the midterm, we're going to say there's some stuff on supply and demand, right? I think that's fair game. I don't know why this isn't coming up, but we had that question on supply and demand, right? We've got some questions on what the meaning of GDP is, how to calculate GDP, how to calculate CPI, and then we also have just numerically, we can think about what goes into the calculation of unemployment. Okay, but then beyond that, make sure that you understand the nuances of like who is considered unemployed, or why are they considered unemployed. And I have questions like that down here where we have, let's see, is it right here? What's an example of structural unemployment? So you'd want to know just about the definition of different types of unemployment. You have that, right? But just have those examples in your mind. Same thing with the why CPI is, what goes into CPI, what goes into GDP. And then things about markets like the gasoline market or the housing market. So when it comes to being safe for the midterm, I don't think of I know that it can be stressful to take these exams and whatnot. I don't know. I feel like I'm at a point in life where like I would love to have this be my only stress. If that was my only stress, it'd be a very unstressful life. So I would just take this and just say like, have I worked hard? Have I tried to understand as much as I can? And then from there, you're just given an opportunity to show it. So you can just do your best, and whatever happens, happens. It's doing well on the midterm is great, and not doing well is not the end of the world. I can't emphasize enough, like, embrace this time being in college, because it is awesome. It really does not get better. So that's kind of my pep talk. If you guys got questions, just shoot them my way. But other than that, I thought this was nice to go over this. I'll upload these notes. I'll upload these notes, and then I'll make sure that you guys you have access to all these questions. So, scroll down to the last question we did. Yeah, I can do that. So that'll be right here. Okay. So I'll have everything posted. You guys have all that information. Okay. So let me go ahead and review that. Okay. So any questions, any thoughts? How can you find those midterm review questions? They were just under the last lecture here. All right, just under this lecture 8. Fall 21, lecture 8. So any other thoughts, any other questions? All right. So tomorrow, what you'll see is the midterm pop up, right, as one of these folders that you guys tend to see, and midterm exam right there, and then you'll be good to go. Okay, can you repeat how we would solve the cost weighted, then the CPI, the cost weighted basket? All right, so if we just go back up here, and you're going to want to kind of walk through this, come up with your own numbers, come up with your own products, right? But if we want to know what the CPI is, we're going to say, look, there's a basket size, right? There's a basket that consists of iPhones and water. There's a certain amount of quantity, right? In the base year, those prices are $500 and $1. That gave us the basket year or base year basket cost of $13,500. In 2016, we did the same process with the same quantities but different prices, and ended up with $16,250. Okay. So from there, we've got these two baskets, right? Same identical baskets, different prices. Our CPI is just saying take the basket cost in the year we're concerned about, divided by the base year basket cost, and we're done. Okay, so 16,250 divided by 13,500 gives us 120. So that's how I'd solve it. That's how I did solve it. All right. Good. Hopefully you guys are good to go. Let's see, practice. This is like right here, number 20. That's it. Talk about this one, Carlos. When you were watching the news, and Anchor said the amount of production increase, which in turn increases demand. This one right here. Yeah, so this one here. So the way that I would approach this, all right, so this is a practice problem. Set number 1, question 20. Okay, so when you were watching the news, Anchor said this: the amount of production increase, which in turn increases demand. Something just kind of feels weird about that. So the way that I would think about this is say, all right, well, let's just draw a supply and demand graph here. QP, there's that, there's supply, there's demand. Okay, so production increases, presumably, right? This production, and this is just taken straight from the news. Production increases. This feels like a supply increase, right? That's how we can think about that, right? A supply increase, which means a shift to the right. Okay, so if supply increases and shifts to the right, this is going to happen. We're going to go from S1 to S2, right? Go from S1 to S2. Well, what happens to our equilibrium? We were at E1. Now we move down to E2. We just go to there. Well, that didn't increase demand, right? We don't have the demand increase because production went up. Ultimately, all that happens is we just walk along the demand curve. We're just changing our quantity demanded from Q1 to Q2, right? And so we shift that supply curve right and then move, well, so I'll put an S here, right? So we move along that demand curve. So that is that idea behind a demand versus a supply, or demand shift versus a change in quantity demanded, right? So here, right? So let's see what do we got here? Hint: the answer is A. We got an increase in the quantity demanded here because we move along the demand curve. This is the same thing as we increase our quantity demanded. They just move along that curve. All right. All right. Cool. So hopefully you guys should feel confident. And if you don't, just kind of plug away and know that, you know, the struggle right now while you're studying, that's when you want to have the struggle, right? You don't want to have the struggle in the middle of the midterm, right? You want to have the struggle right now. Because then once you can overcome that, hopefully that clears it up there. And it says, so now when we go back and look at this question, for example, the amount of production increase, which in turn increases demand. If they would have said the production increase, which in turn increases quantity demanded, that would have been a correct statement, right? That's essentially what is being referred to. So, you know, you kind of work through that saying, okay, I can kind of see this. Let me try it again in a different context. And that's when the learning is actually taking place. And so the more that you can do that right now, the better. I've seen a lot of comments on the lecture quizzes that were like, oh, I got kind of tricked on this, but I'm not going to forget it. It's like, that's the point, right? That's absolutely the point. So, all right. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? All right. I wish I could give you guys confidence, right? It's like with those, those graphs can be tough, but the more that you work at it, the better you're going to get, right? And at some point, it's just going to click. And that's just what this is all about, right? This is all about, I don't know if you guys are going to go to a job and they're going to ask you to like calculate the GDP or draw some sort of supply and demand graph just like this, but it's that thought process, that problem solving process that you can work through and you can learn how to overcome problems, which is going to be so valuable. So again, just embrace the difficulty of graphs and overcome them, and you'll feel really good. You'll feel really good. So, all right, guys, I'm gonna call it a day. If you got questions, though, I'll be on Discord throughout the evening, most likely, and then around tomorrow morning. It's always good to hang out with you guys. I talked way, this was supposed to be like 20, 30 minutes, maybe 40, and it's like, I just keep talking. So either way, hopefully you guys got something out of this, and we'll see you guys all tomorrow. I'll be around if you have questions. So thank you guys so much. Don't study too much. Study hard, but don't study too much. Make sure you get some sleep. Get some sleep, okay? All right, guys. We'll see you. Take care. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Wendy.